Started. Okay, we're recording. So welcome everyone to the first task force meeting for the New Garden zoning update of 2025. This is our January meeting. Hope you're having a good start to the new year. We're definitely hitting the ground running with the zoning ordinance update, as you can see all the materials that you received. So we have a lot to get through this evening. So we'll start with just checking in on the process, but also wanted to pull up the drafting plan just to touch base with where we are with those dates and kind of make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of being able to meet the deadlines going forward. Oh, can you hear me all right?
Oh, no, I was just joking. So everything should be configured in here. Can everybody hear really loud and clear? All right, that's good.
All right. We'll then go to old business. We have a couple memos just to touch on for old business rather than bringing up the entire article again. So we'll go through those and then touch on any comments that you had on Article 1 and 12, since we didn't get to those last month. In terms of new business, we have two articles, Article 2, the definitions article, and then Article 8, parking and circulation, to go over. And then we'll briefly discuss the upcoming outreach meeting and end with action items and next steps. Are there any questions about the agenda? Okay. Okay, so we're about halfway through the process in general, about 2/3 way through the drafting. The adoption process, we're aiming to start in June, and that'll be about a 4-month time period. So we still have 2 upcoming public outreach meetings, and then some additional task force meetings. But just to give a little bit more detail, and I'm sorry for those in the room if this is a little hard to see on your screen, we'll send this out afterwards. But this is a drafting plan that we had shared with you in the beginning of the process. Obviously, some of those dates have changed a little bit, like for example, Article 3 has had multiple iterations. So we've been updating this plan with those iterations, which is totally fine. That's part of the process. And then if any dates have changed, we've updated this chart. But I bring this to your attention tonight, just because I know we're throwing a lot at you, like every month. And that's just because we are trying to kind of hit the, not hit our deadlines in terms of like wanting this to go and start the adoption process in terms of informational meetings first in June, and then kind of meetings and hearings later on in the summer. So we are kind of at this point in the drafting plan. So the next couple of months, we're going to see a lot more articles, the historic preservation article, signage, and then in March, we'll end with the last 3 general regulations, lighting and not national resource protection, natural resource protection. Our April meeting will be kind of regrouping on anything that we are still hashing out, but it will also be looking at the zoning ordinance comprehensively. Do you guys have any questions about the drafting timeline? Okay. Well, I thank you in advance, as you've been doing already, just putting your comments in the online documents have been super helpful. And that's what we're going to really be looking for in the coming months, since we'll have a lot to cover in these 1.5-hour meetings. So the more you can review, before the meeting and then in the week after the meeting, the better.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint, and we're going to bring up just the agenda. That we have links to all the stuff that we're going to talk about. So if you're following online, you can bring up your agenda and follow along in real time. The first old business item that we wanted to discuss is a potential update to Article 4, the uses article. So this is an article that we saw a couple months ago. The township asked us to take another look at this article, especially in terms of some of the uses and defining more emerging industries or uses that might fall under more like the industrial or kind of research and development type uses. So we took a look at the existing uses that we have. So we currently have different types of industrial uses: craftsman industrial, light and heavy. We also separated out data center based on your feedback. And then these are the existing uses. So in addition to these uses and the office use, which includes some employment, lab, medical, dental, optical, etc., we are suggesting 3 additional uses. So 1, a biomedical facility, 2, a science and technology center, and 3, a research, experimental, and technology center. These kind of capture some of the uses that we previously had, like under industrial light or industrial heavy or office, but pull them out as unique uses so that they can maybe be regulated, in a different way than some of the existing industrial uses. We have not added this to the article yet. It's more, we are providing this memo to you as a task force and then to the township to provide your feedback on how you would like to incorporate them. So with that, I'm just going to open it up. Any questions or comments?
Does a biopharmaceutical entail nutraceutical type industry?
Sorry, you mean the biomedical facility?
So you can
Or
do
the
biomedical, does that include, it says in there,
Okay.
pharmaceutical, does pharmaceutical entail nutraceutical, which is like a subset of pharmacy type functions, but it's like less intensive of like, I mean, Mike or anybody, if you're familiar with that type of industry, it's like wellness type of stuff rather than like FDA approvable, like prescription based stuff. It's more of like over the counter, like, extract of whatever kind of stuff, but
Nutritional supplement.
Yeah.
nutritional supplements. But there's a huge nutraceutical industry around mushrooms, and I know that's a huge part of a potential kind of, I'll call it, cluster effect based off of where we are. That's so. Just want to make sure that was included.
I think we could include that in there because I think it's about the impacts of the use, not necessarily like what exactly is being produced in the facility if they have the same externalities. So in terms of whether it's, truck traffic or, noise or any of that, we can include that. So we'll add that to the definition.
I would imagine it would be very much like just a standard commercial outward looking facility with like a lab interior, so it would be very similar. I just want to make sure that's something that's identified.
Point.
And just for a little bit of context, Sam, I'm not sure how many people on the call are members of the Urban Land Institute, but the 2024 ULI sponsored like land use and real estate trends report was released recently, and these are some of those top emerging land uses, not only within Pennsylvania, but across the country. So I think it's really great that we're capturing them now and taking advantage of that. So it's not like we're have things in here that aren't realistic. These are kind of the true emerging land uses across the country.
My only question is, there's a request from the township. Was there anything specific from the township, Chris, that you were seeing that, besides nutraceuticals, is there anything else we were trying to achieve with this or anything that we should think about or?
Well, when I think of this, I think of you're gonna kind of co-locate your kind of white collar and manufacturing type function in a similar type facility
Mhm.
because it's more about high grade output type. So very much to like what like a Purolite, obviously with kind of mirror. So 100%, yeah, I would imagine that this is like the vision if we were ever going to execute a business park type function, but leveraging like an industrial type of function that's kind of like regionally aligned with what we're already doing. This would be like in alignment with that one, I would have to say, yeah. Rather than like saying like some random kind of like outside the box
Mhm.
function that's not already
Yeah. Okay.
identified with the area, yeah. Because even
Yeah.
with like a data center, I mean, they're not coming in at large across Pennsylvania like they are in other areas, but
More so.
I would
based on-
imagine the value of these would be much, much higher than the value of a data center when it comes to like local tax footprint.
Exactly. Have an actual employment associated with the.
Well, not just that, yeah, we just don't have the tax, our municipal tax law, it just essentially makes data centers useless to us as a township.
Really?
Yeah. There would be no reason I would recommend to any member of a board of supervisors to use any public land to get a data center on our acquisition because we don't have business personal property tax.
It's probably one step below, self-storage places, right?
Yeah.
And
Essentially,
they-
yeah, it's
Like there's
you tax the commercial box structure, but the value is what's inside the structure.
And unfortunately, they don't generate as many as employees as you might think. Right? They're
They
largely
don't. So it's and
self-servicing
the EIT
facilities.
from like a 50-person employment base would be nominal. The commercial or the property tax on that commercial structure would be nominal. But it's the million square feet of like a $4 per square foot
Mhm.
on server and from that, which is what makes it so viable to Virginia communities.
Right.
So you'll get like $1 million in like a reassessed property tax in Virginia on a single property, but you'll get $4 per square foot per server space. And that's what generates $24 million. So it's like the scale is like, if you don't have that, then don't do it because it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And it actually sucks more water, utilities, and everything else. Yeah. So it actually makes that kind of commercial tax kind of immediately go away.
Right. That's interesting.
Plus, there's a huge difference between like Dominion and Chesapeake Energy and Pico. So I just
Yeah.
I lack the confidence in Pico for their ability to house that type of like massive footprint in this area. But I digress.
In light of the peculiarities of our economic model, are there kinds of industries that would be most desirable for us to include, and have we adequately provided for them in zoning?
I think if you're looking at anything, look at everything through the lens of those rateable taxes outside of property tax. Because our rate is so low that we're not a school district, so no property tax really makes sense in terms of a value add to us. So everything is based off of what it produces from jobs or earned income for residences
Yeah.
or amusement, because that's what we have. And then we have hotel tax. Those are our Act 511 kind of economic taxes. And the only one that kind of comes from like a generalized industry like that would make sense is earned income tax. So small buildings with lots of workers at high paying jobs, that's kind of the thumbs up there. So these would be very much in line with that one because I imagine you would have PhDs and other high earners kind of associated with these types of trades, more so than like a general warehouse type function or manufacturing type function. And that's kind of proofed out in what we already have because of our cold storage facilities, everything. We have enough to kind of understand that's what the kind of the return from that use is already yielding to the township. And it's good. It serves as a base, but it's not, the highest and best. If you're seeking that, then I would say plus it up a little bit
Right. That's very helpful. Thank you.
until they change Pennsylvania municipal tax law, which will probably not happen in any of our lifetimes. Yeah.
Sorry
I
for
think
that
you-
digression. Thank you.
No, this is really helpful. You are lucky to have Chris as your township manager. He knows so much about this kind of stuff. Okay, the only other comment here, I know Michael going back to some of the original uses that we had that are still staying in the article. You did flag one of the typical craftsman industrial uses that we had was agricultural growing, which we are going to remove. That is actually a holdover from a previous version. We do have that agricultural operation use that separates out different kinds of agricultural operations, including mushroom operations and mushroom composting. So we don't want there to be conflicts. So we'll remove that. The other piece, I know we've been talking about the potential for heavy industrial in the mixed use corridor. Definitely not as a permitted by right use, but potentially as a conditional use. You know, this is something that we're still talking, with the township about, and especially since it's along kind of a main. It's meant to be like a more mixed use corridor, different other types of uses, but we understand kind of the site that you're talking about and the unique circumstances. So this is something we're talking to the township about, and we have not lost sight of it. Just want to let you know.
I appreciate it.
Semantic, just because it's in our current verbiage, is there some sort of catch-all, non-identified, otherwise lawful use as stated that kind of goes as like maybe a conditional type function?
Mhm.
And normally you put those in the industrial sections of your code because those are the ones where it's like
Yeah.
burgeoning industries happen all the time. You can never really keep up with it. So it's kind of like a catch-all, but you would put it as a conditional option.
Yes, so we have some language. I'm gonna have to pull up the original. Actually, Seth, is that something that you could look up while we continue some of the language that we have in there regarding uses not defined? He'll bring that up and we'll put it in the chat. But we do have something like that. That I think it's like up to the discretion of a zoning officer, but we'll see it once Seth brings it up. I will say, I think from our experience using these uses with other municipalities, of the way that we instead of trying to parse out every single type of industrial light, industrial heavy, office use, retail use, service use, I'm scrolling like we're in Article 4, but if you remember, we have like retail general, retail neighborhood, services general, services neighborhood, and by kind of defining those buckets, and rather than listing all the different uses, it makes it a lot easier to classify certain uses that come in that are not necessarily written. Thanks, Seth, for finding that. So the language that we have right now regarding uses not provided for is when a use is not provided for in this chapter within any zoning district, then the proposed use should be considered a special exception and shall be approved according to those regulations. So we have it as a special exception. And then there's some other kind of criteria just about consistent with, the general form, function, design in the neighborhood that's being proposed in, less intensive in external impacts and nuisances than other uses in that district, etc.
Do you feel allowing that decision to the zoning hearing board rather than the supervisors is appropriate?
That's
Elected
So-
officials versus,
well, in the realm of Pennsylvania law, zoning hearing board is a quasi judicial board of individuals. I mean, it's typically the type of board that would make that decision. If that language wasn't in there, someone could apply for a variance and then it's going to them anyways.
yeah, I've seen it like in Chad's Ford Township, they usually put it as a conditional use. Just so that it sticks with the board of supervisors rather than, but I guess in reality, if you're going to the zoning hearing board, you're going to present in front of the planning commission for their recommendation. You're going to the supervisors for their recommendation. And if neither of them want it, they're obviously just going to make a negative recommendation. And then you're headed into the zoning hearing board with their
Against-
thoughts anyways.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
that's a
You
serious
know what they
headline.
say, if you're a board that doesn't like your zoning hearing decisions, then you can just change your zoning hearing board. That's kind of what the,
So I mean, Tom brings up a point, like, we typically put these in as special exceptions. If this is something, an area where the township wants to handle it differently, now's the time.
for Winnie's input, she will likely kind of say the same thing. I think she tells me about 1,000 times a day. Second-class townships are creatures of statute. So kind of conforming with larger municipal kind of precedent in Pennsylvania is kind of where this will fall.
Sounds good. Okay. So then moving on to Article 1. This was a article that we shared back in December and that we didn't get a chance to discuss it in December. This is essentially where you have all the administrative information, information about the zoning hearing board and their role and purview. This article kind of combines your existing Articles 1, Articles 19, and Articles 20. So some stuff from general provisions, administration, and zoning hearing board. It doesn't really substantially change what you have now. It just kind of updates it and streamlines it to make it a little clearer. This is an article that you can see some of Robert's comments. This is something that we definitely are reviewing with the township, especially they're the ones that are administering a lot of the code. So we'll be working with them to make sure that their comments are resolved. Just for your knowledge, like, we did include this little chart with some notes that, like, if something with your existing sections, proposed sections, and if something really changed, what it was. So if you are interested in digging in more, this is a good guide. Going through the comments here, there were not any significant comments that I thought were kind of worthy of discussion. A lot of it made sense. We're talking to Robert about the comments, but just wanted to pause if anyone had any questions that they weren't able to get into the document. Okay. So then moving on to the next article, Article 12 is nonconformities. Once again, this was sent out back in December, but we didn't have a chance to get to it. So this article kind of consolidates the regulations that you had in your nonconforming uses, structures, buildings, and lots. The primary, there are just a few kind of differences. So one, in terms of nonconforming use, your existing ordinance allows for a change in use through the conditional use process. Our proposed language and what we've done in the past with other municipalities is that changes through the special exception use process and provides specific criteria to follow when doing so. Since we just discussed the conditional use versus special exception, just wanted to flag that in case there are any questions. Additionally, there are some additional regulations for the development of a non-conforming lot in your residential districts. In terms of structures, there's some additional regulations to ensure minimal impact when expanding non-conforming structures. An example of this is that we're decreasing the allowed expansion from 35% to 25% of the floor area. And then there's some additional regulations regarding signage and signs that are exempt from the article. Another thing is that your existing ordinance had some language that we've never seen in other ordinances, just that the zoning officer has to identify and register all non-conforming uses. This is a significant task, and we have not seen it in other zoning ordinances. So wanted to discuss it with staff, and it seems like this has never occurred in the past, so we are recommending removing it unless it's something that was included in your existing ordinance for a reason that we're not aware of.
I agree.
Okay. Just some of the comments here. Don, I know you had a comment about why we're allowing an expansion of floor area for non-conforming buildings or structures. And as we said, we're decreasing what's allowed now, which is 35%. We recommend allowing around 25% because it allows for some flexibility that's sometimes needed. Without it
Why not bring it forward to the zoning hearing board? Why not make it approved, subject to approval? It could be something that the township doesn't want at all in a non-conforming case.
That is certainly a possibility. I think the 25% is maybe bringing it down a little bit. I think having all expansion go to the zoning hearing board might be a little restrictive, especially if it's like a
Sure,
nominal
I understand,
change.
but in a use you don't want, you want it to be restrictive. Chris, what do you think?
So there's a distinct difference between a non-conforming use and a non-conforming building.
That's true. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
Say that
So-
one more time. What was the second one? Non-conforming what?
So
Building,
non-conforming
structure.
building or structure. So what we're talking about here is the physical structure or building itself, not necessarily an expansion of a
Right, I
new
understand,
use.
but if it's a non-conforming
Structure.
structure, it may not be something you want. Why would you grant it automatically? Why wouldn't it come forward to the hearing?
Yeah, it seems like it gives a free pass to make it an even bigger non-conformance
Yeah,
by right almost.
right.
Yeah, I think
What do you
to
think,
Seth's
Jeff?
point, and thanks for flagging that. Like we could be talking about a house that is kind of unique, that is within the front yard setback or something that we've set, and they want to put on an addition. It's something where you would want to allow that flexibility for that owner. But Seth, sorry, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm reading some case law on it as we're sitting here. There is a Pennsylvania doctrine called the Doctrine of Natural Expansion, and the Pennsylvania Appellate Court has upheld allowing even non-conforming uses to kind of naturally expand as time and growth and trade goes on. So that this 25% I have seen in ordinances across the Commonwealth, and I think that's the reaction to that doctrine is.
So you're
making that
saying,
allowance.
so you're saying that if you have a non-conforming building or structure in the words that we're using, which has a front yard setback nonconformity, that they could essentially add an addition to the building within that front yard setback up into the dimensional standard of nonconformance.
So, and we may want to specify this in here clearly, because one thing you can say is, to a certain degree, you can't increase the non-conformity. So for example, if you're into the front setback, you could expand the building to the rear, as long as you're not increasing the actual non-conformity itself.
Yeah, so if the
Seth, I think the
addition
real
complies,
the real kind of thing to think about here is the appeals process. So if you're talking about how this is going to be restrictive in nature to the point where it possibly would be too restrictive, just because it's our local zoning doesn't mean it won't get appealed and brought up to a higher level statute. And usually in Pennsylvania, from my understanding, is they yield to the individual property owner first. And if it's not something that's seen as like the township is unwilling to compromise, they'll probably grant it and go against any like negative decision from a local zoning hearing board. So I don't know what that balance is between being giving but not too giving, but also not overly restrictive to the point where people can just appeal beyond our normal zoning hearing board process, which are subject to do if they don't like the decision. And higher level places in Pennsylvania just keep on overturning our decisions.
I would
read that
think
line.
that the addition would have to comply with current building setbacks, and if they wanted it to not comply with the building setbacks, they would have to seek that variance.
Correct. Yeah. Or create
Yes,
any
but the-
other issue.
So I guess
Yeah,
the
the
answer here
building
is it
itself would-
depends.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was to say the answer sounds like it depends.
Well, yeah, yes, but the structure is non-conforming because maybe it extends into the front yard setback. So that's what makes it non-conforming. The addition wouldn't be able to further, add into that conforming, setback.
Right.
But it could be expanded by up to 25% to the side or rear within conformance.
Yeah, so within the limits of the setbacks, and if they wanted to encroach into that front yard setback, for example, and say it was 5 feet from the property line, and the setback was 10, but the addition was 7, you could use that as a justification as part of your zoning hearing board application that you're not further bringing the property into non-conformance. Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you guys.
I think I'm a little bit confused. Are you saying that this provides, this provides for an expansion of the building so long it does not increase the nonconformity? Or they can continue to expand the nonconformity with this provision?
The first.
First, correct.
So the deck on the back is okay, but further encroaching into the front yard non-conforming setback is not allowed.
Without a variance, correct.
Okay.
Jeff, if I may, I read the line of cases after Mrs. Shulsky was here for the Blittersdorf case application that we reviewed on the Planning Commission. And in the first case, it was that, right, the front yard setback was exceeded, or the building was within the setback, or actually the setback was perhaps adopted after the building was first built.
Mhm.
But in any event, they wanted to put a second floor. And so there was discussion about whether that was building in the setback. And the court said it was okay to put a second floor on top of that first floor, which was short, too close to the line. And the cases went everywhere after that. And then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court cleaned it up some and generally said there are limits on it, and there are limits on it. That it's not carte blanche. You can't continue to do whatever you want because of that initial nonconformance.
Right.
That's how I read it.
Yep.
And Seth and Samantha, just a observation. Do you think it should say legal nonconforming? It's always been practice, like since I've been here, whenever we're reviewing a permit and there is a nonconforming structure, that it's only acceptable if it was nonconforming prior to the introduction of the zoning ordinance. So I feel like the language right now kind of opens it up to, if so-and-so illegally built a building within a setback, it's not conforming, but is it legally not conforming?
I think that's a great point, Matt.
So just to kind of tighten it up a little bit.
No, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah, we talk about like the documentation needed, but we can add that throughout the ordinance. Okay. And then Don, your other comment here, down, this is in the non-conforming uses section in terms of a change of use. We say that, you know, a non-conforming use should be or shall be permitted to be changed to another non-conforming use upon application to the zoning hearing board for a special exception. So following the special exception use procedures, but then in addition, proving or the applicant should show that the non-conforming use cannot be changed reasonably to a permitted use. And your question was what constitutes cannot be changed reasonably to a permitted use. This is something, you know, there are a set of criteria down here just about demonstrating that the change will be less objectionable in terms of external effects, and demonstrating that the change will meet other requirements of this chapter. In terms of this A provision, we do not try or attempt to define change reasonably, cannot be changed reasonably to a permitted use. We feel like this is something that it's the burden of the applicant to provide, because that can mean a lot of different things. So it's our practice not to define that and to leave that up to the applicant and then the zoning hearing board to interpret that according, you know, to their special use, special exception use procedures, and their own interpretation. But we're happy to like discuss what the task force thinks. This might be something too that like we flag for Winnie, you know, just in terms of like that legal perspective.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
could definitely see that.
You know, it's not something that's quantifiable necessarily all the time, but it goes hand in hand with what the zoning hearing board process is like. I mean, it can be subjective, and you know, that's what happens when special exceptions and variances and those types of things go in front of the zoning hearing board. Is it becomes the burden of the applicant to express that and state that, and then up to the zoning hearing board to interpret. So there's certainly where that level of subjectivity comes into play.
Okay. Any other non-conformity article comments or questions? Okay. So the next kind of old business, it is not a polished or refined map, but we did just want to provide an update on where we're headed based on your feedback last month on the map. So one, based on your feedback, we are, and Seth will talk about this in a little bit, we are considering another district. We don't name to be determined, and I won't go into the details of the district right now, but essentially allowing like some flexibility, whether it's more mixed use, whether it's more residential, but changing this area that was residential flex and enterprise into this new district around the airport.
Samantha, just real quick, I was thinking about that. Is there a so I know it's a little bit different than other states that I've kind of understood. So obviously you have your kind of zoning text amendment as an alignment with your comp plan, which has your land uses defined in a kind of layered effect. Is this an instance where, let's say we have residential flex and enterprise, which is another way of saying that's kind of like in the aggregate mixed use, to have a mixed use overlaid district on top of this as an add option for that entire contiguous area?
So that's actually something that we were kind of playing around with, like a weird, or not, I shouldn't say weird, but like an overlay kind of floating district a little bit. So that is something that we are considering, because we want to make sure, we want it to be market responsive, but we also want to rightfully so, like give the public an understanding of like the two potential or multiple potential options that could happen here. So that is something that we're considering. Seth, since we're talking about this district, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what our thoughts are on that and updates to Article 3.
Yeah, do you want to pull up that memo?
Yes.
Sam?
Oh,
So-
it's right behind. There you go.
So yeah, starting right there, that is not the final name. We already have a residential flex district, but we're still wordsmithing it. Yeah, kind of as Sam has alluded to, exploring what would be kind of a unique type of a district that tries to blend the opportunity for industrial enterprise, residential development, depending on market demand. I mean, other communities have done mixed-use districts out the wazoo. You see them all over the place, but they're usually pretty tailored to some type of commercial or retail combination of residential. They don't always try to incorporate the opportunity for potentially light industrial or enterprise type development. So we're still looking amongst our own resources and outside resources to come up with a good solution there. But we've certainly kind of been brewing on some ideas based on what the township has been talking about, and kind of what we've shared up to this point. So stay tuned on that for sure.
Now, my only concern is just because if you're talking about commercial retail, at a certain point, the township and its kind of market zones, if you will be saturated. If you just kind of allow for a maximum amount of just supportable commercial square footage in the area. And of course, as you kind of buffer those out, you kind of bank into other townships and what they have.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, commercial in those true instances are also dependent upon residential kind of near them. And there's
Yep.
no multiplier where we'll ever be able to achieve significant scaling up of some more market supportable commercial square footage without adding in thousands and thousands and thousands of extra homes.
Correct.
So I just don't want to zone something with that vision and then have it never be realized, because in the prior instances, we built out enough commercial square footage in that retail sense, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why we didn't think that like mixed use corridor was an appropriate district here, like kind of for that reason. Like we
Mhm.
almost see it like, as we said, like entertainment, attraction, experience type uses, light industrial uses, or pure residential flex like housing
Yeah.
uses. So yeah, so we're still working on this. We will be bringing the intent statement, excuse me, some initial dimensional regulations to you in February at your task force meeting. I believe that's on the 19th. It's the week before the public meeting. So there are two meetings in February. So we'll be bringing that to you as a task force first, the week before the public outreach meeting, prior to bringing it to the public. So that will be a big topic of conversation next week. Or sorry, next month.
And then
Oh, sorry.
it's fine. In terms of like the pure residential districts, and we've had previous conversations here at the task force about making sure that these are in alignment with the existing areas that we've zoned them as, and then planning to ensure that the residential flex district is kind of our maximum opportunity for, call it dense residential development, or presents the highest density possible. So we have shifted the numbers around a little bit. Not a lot has changed in the residential low density, but we did want to keep it in the memo just as kind of a marker for where we're going beyond low density residential. For the residential medium density, we see some developments throughout the township that are around the 5 dwelling unit per acre, just under that, with lot sizes that align with what we've crafted here. And that was the goal from the onset of the residential medium density district, was to largely capture places that are previously been developed and then go residential flex as kind of our growth district from there on. So this is about 5 dwelling units an acre. And then Sam, if you want to go down to the new figures for residential flex. Yeah. So under the revised figures for residential flex, option 2 presents our highest density development option, up to 8 dwelling units an acre, with 25% of the gross tract acreage dedicated as open space. I understand in previous conversations, the task force has said, look, we have a lot of valuable open space, not only in around the township, but throughout other developments. Residential flex might not be a district where we want to focus on quote unquote conservation development or cluster development. We just want to see opportunity for dense residential development. So we did pull back those required open space numbers. I still think there's value in having a little bit of that in there for community value and a sense of place, and it does allow for some buffering along roadways and things to kind of at least make them less obvious from certain parts of the township, but certainly not as high as we had it previously. I think we had it around the 40 to 50 mark. So we've increased the density allowances and dropped down the required amount of open space. And that's for options 1 and 2. And then option 3 is still the development option that's only available when you can't extend public utility service to facilitate development at a larger scale, smaller lots. And that would require a 1 acre minimum lot size to put on lot septic systems, and there's no open space requirement because your development's going to be so much more spread out anyways, to facilitate those on lot systems, regardless of the scales to which you develop the property. We are putting in a maximum lot size for options 1 and 2 at half an acre. We do want to see, again, kind of denser development patterns. So capping that lot size for new development at half an acre would certainly count and help towards that. Allowing for flexible residential lot sizes to give developers the maximum opportunity to meet that 8 dwelling units an acre, get flexible on lot sizes. There's still setback requirements they have to meet. There's still building code requirements they have to meet to control development style and typology, but lot sizes in this instance won't be one of those factors that they have to take into consideration. A little bit more, Sam. And then we did bump up the impervious lot coverage allowances for the different types of residential uses, all the way up to 80% for a townhouse lot, 85% for multi-unit lots, to give, again, more opportunity for denser development within that 8 dwelling units an acre allowance for the second development option. So I have done the math on these several times. They pencil out to me in the back of a napkin. I'm not a developer. I've seen development projects. I kind of have a general understanding of, how the math would go into play here. So looking for some additional commentary, but this is where we set it on at this point.
Thank you. Tom, if you had an opportunity to look at this and if so, what's your take on how development friendly some of these changes are?
I would need to dive into it a little bit deeper than I have. But I can do that.
One of our goals was to make this an inviting place for developers to come and enable us to meet our objectives to provide more residential housing. That's hard for us to do without having the ability to look at some of these changes through the eyes of a developer. So we would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind taking the time to do that and let us know what you think.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, so we'll stay tuned. Tom, Seth, and you have both of our contact information. Feel free to give us a call, or we can set up, some time to discuss if you have any questions as we go through.
Yeah, let's I'll send you guys an email, but we should set up like a Teams or something. That way I can get something on my calendar.
That'd be cool.
Sounds good. Okay, so going back to the zoning map and our discussion last time, first of all, we talked about open space and our different classifications of open space and our recommendations regarding not zoning any open space that's not like township owned or the golf course, for example. So any property that had like an easement or something on it, keeping a surrounding district, not classifying it as open space. So, this large parcel on Penn Green, or collection of parcels on Penn Green Road, will revert to residential flex from the open space classification that we previously had based on their easement. And then we discussed kind of filling in anything kind of between, in general, between Gap, Newport Pike and Baltimore Pike. Filling this in and really concentrating the density in this area in terms of housing density, because of a few factors. One, it's close to the corridors, the sewer infrastructure that's in place or that can be easily expanded in this area. So we will be making those changes as well. Those areas. And then we did realize, at the bottom of the map here, we had some residential flex that was a holdover from a previous version. We are really trying to limit the residential flex in the southern part of the township, so we'll be changing that back to residential low. And then we did look at this parcel here on Broad Run, and ran the numbers, and I'm realizing, Seth, that I think we ran the numbers with the previous version of residential flex for that, in terms of how many units could fit on that parcel.
Oh, the example parcel?
Yeah. So we had run the numbers and realized that with our previous version of residential flex and the open space requirements, you could actually, it was fewer units with residential flex. And
I think I was using that as like my model when I was rerunning the numbers for the revisions, but
I
will
know
double check those.
exactly how many units you can fit into that, and it's upwards of 40,000 gallons of extra flow. So whatever that means, that's what you're going to get.
Do you guys have a rough number of how many units we'd be looking at adding to New Garden based upon the revised zoning?
So in the
Good
net?
question, Tom.
So everything at the end of the day is going to be wastewater limited. So this is kind of like you're opening up the map, and it'll be kind of like a first come, first serve type basis. But at the end of the day, the decisions kind of lie with ultimately larger level, like aqua capacity increasing decisions. But a while back, there was a discussion with aqua leadership to say, is it beyond the realm of possibility that you could at some point put 1,500 to 2,000 additional units in the township? And that answer was yes.
Yeah, and with that parcel in particular, I'm gonna pull up our handy dandy map. I'm just gonna put on the sewer layer.
Of course, that includes the potential build out of White Clay, so that already eats into that number, which is about a third of the 1,500.
Yeah, I was about to say that's got to be at least 600 or 700, isn't it?
Less than that, yeah. In terms of
Well,
total
for-
EUs, if you add in the commercial, then you add that back into it, yeah, because it's all EDU dependent.
For thinking with these parcels here at the intersection of Broad Run and Newark, one, we heard from your solicitor, and it's something we've heard before, that it's often easier to defend zoning districts or boundaries when there's a road kind of separation or boundary. So we were looking kind of at this road as a bounding point, and then also just because of potential proximity to the existing sewer, it being maybe more potential for option 1 and 2 in residential flex. If it's never expanded, then it defaults to option 3.
It's encumbered with natural resources. You couldn't develop half of it.
We were
There's a
looking
big-
at. Oh, go ahead.
There's a big old stream. There's 2 streams on the property.
Yeah.
Yeah, your development area gets cut down
It's
probably.
right here. Yeah. So
10 acres.
we think it makes sense to put it as residential flex. It gives the option, maybe the more flexibility. Might not you're not going to get as many units as a residential flex in another area. But it certainly doesn't close it off to opportunities in the future. And it helps just, with the road boundary as well. So that was our thinking there. I think that those were.
Do we know who owns that parcel? I mean, I know who owns it, dude.
I know too.
Yeah, just
Hey.
there you
Well,
go.
everyone knows. Yeah. On both of the parcels here,
Yeah.
same person.
So the more than likely is because of the fact that there's like a firewall that exists between the south and the Route 41 kind of connection points to get to other wastewater treatment facilities. It's all dependent upon tapping into that 40K gallons of extra flow at the south end plant. That would still require some sort of like plant capacity building, not capacity, excuse me, plant retrofitting for some different kind of overhauling that needs to be done there. But it is at the end of the day rated to a maximum amount that won't really be able to be expanded, from my understanding from Aqua.
Yeah, I mean,
Is there any legal stature set up that if the township designates a property for a certain zoning and it's permitted a certain amount of uses, but the township cannot provide its sewer, there has to be some concession with that? Isn't there something with that? I thought I read that the other day.
But not
I
that
thought we were
know.
taking that out of the zoning ordinance.
Well, I think that's one of the options in flex, right? Was that
Yeah.
if public sewer wasn't available, it's basically reverts to residential life.
Yeah, and I don't know how much that dynamic changes because we no longer own the sewer system.
Good point.
I was gonna say, is it worth zoning this property for future expansion of wastewater? Given its location, low point and near a stream,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's currently a cowtel. They literally just ship cows in, let them quarantine for a certain amount of days, and then ship them out.
wow.
Wondering why I always.
So it's a temporary residential.
Yeah, they
Short-term-
ship
it's a
them
short-term
they
rental.
ship them to the Netherlands.
Wow, interesting.
What-
Yeah, so those are the primary changes before making a change to the map itself and uploading.
Did you
all
want to
the
go over
layers.
the RF from Enterprise there? I think we missed that.
Yes. So that will, and I think it was up here too, potentially at some point before the open space. And now, Chris, I'm remembering our conversation around this residential flex, and I'm blanking a little bit on the conversation around the enterprise. But basically, I think the idea was like wanting to provide some sort of like buffer between the mixed use and the enterprise and the residential areas, not wanting to really see an expansion of some of the operations in those areas. Am I on point? Sorry about. I have a lot of
Yeah,
things
that
in my
was
head.
the kind of final parameters that were discussed with the solicitor was, number one, a transitionary kind of a intensity between areas, but of course, I don't think anybody would be remiss to understand what kind of facility is currently there. And it's also one where, because it's the type of facility that it is, doesn't necessarily have potentially long-term protections in place. And so if we were to revert it to a more allowable conforming use, the ability for the township to understand how to kind of navigate that eventual outcome with acre and everything as it pertains to the property there would be lessened. So you would want to keep it like a non-conforming use within a residentially zoned district. So it's kind of like 5 reasons why.
Thanks, Chris. And that reminds me to kind of close a loop with you all as a task force. I know when we were talking about uses and some of the agricultural uses, we flagged that section for review by the solicitor, and this was kind of the outcome. Like, it's harder to change the use regulations because of acre and some of the other laws, it's better to designate certain areas as a different district that makes sense in the context. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so we'll be updating this map and we'll be putting the updated layers on the map, so you can take a closer look. Okay, so we got through old business with 30 minutes to spare, which is better than last month. So we're gonna move on to Article 2. This is the definitions article. I will note that this article we typically have towards the end of the process, even a little later than this, because we want to make sure that it encompasses all the terms that we want to make sure are defined. We want to make sure that there are no definitions of words that are not used in the ordinance. We moved it up a little bit just because we're having some conversations about definitions, so we wanted to get it out there for your review. But our team at the end of the process will be double checking just to make sure that any terms that we have in this article are used in the ordinance. And if there are any terms in the ordinance that need a definition, we'll make sure that those are added. So this is a draft and kind of a work in progress. In this memo, we provide some background information on to compare the existing definitions with our proposed definitions. So there are a lot of proposed terms that are not in your existing ordinance. There are some terms that use the same term and definition from the existing ordinance almost exactly. Others that have minor tweaks just for clarity, but it doesn't really change the meaning of the term. And then there are terms in green that update the definition of the term from the existing ordinance. And we've kind of included, I thought we included a table below. There's a chance if I didn't include it, I will send that out. There were only a couple terms that had a change, so I'm sorry if that table is not included. We also included the existing Article 2 as an attachment to this memo. This just goes through all your existing definitions and color codes them. You can see it. Just gotta scroll down here. So this is just a way, if you're interested in a specific definition in your existing code, this is an easy way to understand how it's included in the existing or proposed definitions. There were not, the last I checked, there were not any major comments about definitions, but any comments for discussion now? Go to the top.
Yeah, Samantha, so the guest comment, I'd actually added that. No, I just wanted to clarify if that's kind of what you were looking for, a more precise definition, just about what would constitute prime woodlands. But I know historically, as you've seen in our ordinance, that kind of captures the definition I feel that we've been using. So I think if we just stuck with that, the 4 inch, all trees 4 inches greater in diameter in the sensitive areas. But I think that's a pretty good standard.
Thank you. I'm just gonna tag that this is from the township. And this is something that we'll also discuss during the natural resource conservation article, I'm sure, just wanting to make sure that everything is in alignment. Thank you for adding that, Matt.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. Now to the fun stuff. parking and circulation. I'm going to pass it over to Seth to talk about this article.
Thank you, Sam. Well, everyone's been itching to talk about parking tonight. It's a very exciting section of the ordinance. One thing off the top here that we've done, which is kind of unique, but it's an emerging trend across the country, is generally eliminated the need for minimum parking requirements. We see this in communities, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country, where zoning ordinances can be prohibitive for new development because of the need for substantial number of parking spaces that end up being not utilized and just becomes an eyesore across corridors and across wide swaths of communities. So we've taken a different approach here, where we only require a new off-street parking spaces for new developments, 5,000 square feet or more in size, or the renovation or expansion of existing structures that are 25,000 square feet in size or more. In other communities where we've talked about doing something like this, there has been some concern about, well, what if somebody comes into the office and they're not quite sure what they might need to have for a use that doesn't trigger that, or they're, mom and pop, and they're trying to make sure that they're doing everything right for a smaller establishment. We do provide a table that provides kind of a recommended number of minimum parking spaces, but not a requirement. These are sourced from other ordinances that we've done where they previously were required minimum spaces, revised a little bit to be a little bit more user-friendly, but again, just positioning them as a recommended number of spaces as a conversation piece, something to reference, to look at, to make sure that everyone's comfortable with projects going in, but again, not a requirement. For that 5,000 square feet or more of new development, or the 25,000 square feet of renovation, that would trigger what we call parking demand analysis. And we provide in the ordinance what that parking demand analysis shall include, who should prepare it, to meet the requirements of the township and the satisfaction of the planning commission and the board of supervisors. And that would ultimately determine the number of parking spaces that would be accompanying that type of development. I would argue that those analyses will probably generally return fewer spaces than what we would have seen have we stuck with our minimum number of required spaces anyways. But we are still capturing a minimum number of spaces at some point for larger scale developments. Other sections of the ordinance, we talk about shared parking scenarios for places that do require off-street parking spaces. We regulate the parking of RVs and boats, talk about unregistered junk vehicles, and then loading spaces for commercial and industrial uses are important as well. Dawn has provided some great comments up to this point about different types of uses and how do we come to determinations. Very good conversation pieces. In our recommended number of spaces table, we do defer to an analysis for several different types of uses. And generally it comes down to more complicated, more difficult to define types of uses for parking spaces where an analysis would be more appropriate anyways. Again, we're not saying that they're required, so it's just something to use as a reference piece. So that's why those are in there for like schools and libraries and museums. I think would be appropriate for demand analysis per Dawn's comment, because they're a more uncommon type of use that you're not going to see on a regular basis. And again, something a little more difficult to define based on how those types of buildings are used in terms of displays and foot traffic and such. But yeah, and that's kind of the gist of the new parking section. Again, kind of in line with what we're doing with residential flex, trying to make things more flexible, easier to understand, easier to digest, make it developers' lives a little bit more simple to, not open it up all the way to make development completely easy, but make it less difficult to make projects come to reality. Open to questions, comments, anyone's thoughts. Tom, what do you think?
It's definitely interesting. I think from a residential standpoint, the one per unit's probably light.
So I was gonna say, yeah.
I think you're going to end up in that situation having just a ton of on-street parking, especially like townhouse developments, multi-unit. I mean, those are typically like two space per unit. I mean, obviously single unit detached, which would be just like your single family, they're going to most likely have a driveway of some sort, which you're going to fit more spaces on. But a lot of the developments within New Garden don't, they, in the past, don't want to see on-street parking, which could change, obviously. Get back to that neo-traditional development. Houses are close to the street, parking, things of that nature.
I think-
Go ahead.
Well, I guess, as a developer, I think you provide a lot of good insight to this conversation. My perspective has always been developers know what they need in terms of parking spaces. They don't want to build more than they need, but they don't want to build less because it makes their developments less enticing, either residential or commercial. So, that's why we went with one per unit. I mean, it's a good reference point, but again, I think, when somebody comes in to do a large multifamily mixed use or tight residential development, they're going to do what, they think they need and what the market's driving for them to make that development palatable. So,
Yeah, but I guess it also depends if they're going to be the end user or not. Some people are out there just developing multifamily projects and then flipping it to someone who's going to hold it long term. And they could care less how many parking spaces are going to be there because all they want to see is the number of units, because that's what's going to drive their value. It's not going to be like, oh, you got
Right.
180 units and 300 parking spaces. It's going to be like, you got me 240 units and I don't really care how much parking's there because I got 240 units. But I'm almost of the opinion maybe you still have required number of parking spaces, but it could be waived if a parking demand analysis was provided.
well, I think in that example in particular, that 5,000 square foot threshold for new development, it's pretty small, quite honestly. So at that point, you're going to have to do demand analysis anyways. And that's going to trigger some number of minimum required spaces.
So, and who's doing these parking demand analysis?
Sam, can you go down to that section? It's after the table.
Because from like a developer standpoint, that to me just sounds like additional costs. Unless like someone like me could prepare that demand analysis, but then again,
Well, if you're building less parking, it's in the wash, Tom.
Yeah. So there's under subsection C there, it talks about the requirements of the analysis prepared by a PE or an engineer. I think the PE could be like a civil or a traffic engineer. We're not stipulating either or there. A company would be a site plan, an analysis of parking demand information there's some literature out there that talks about appropriate references to minimum parking spaces, and the existing data, and then proposing that minimum maximum parking ratio.
Definitely know I think we have certified professional that includes engineer and planner in the definitions. This is an example of a term that when we're going through at the end and making sure that everything is defined, these are terms that we would absolutely want defined.
Yeah, like, well, I mean, because like a
Certification.
registered landscape architect could very well prepare that analysis as well.
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely unique. I mean, if you want development, not requiring a specific amount of parking would be, I mean, because those parking demand analysis is just like any historical impact assessment that a township may ask you to provide. Obviously, the developer is going to hire someone that's going to draft that report in their favor.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't come across it. A lot of townships, at least in my experience, are still requiring.
Would the parking demand analysis be subject to like an engineer review from the township during the land development? Like they provide comments like any other traffic impact
Yep.
study or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine the board
Yeah.
Or the
Yeah.
planning
Yeah.
commission would want to hear
Like,
what
just make sure it doesn't-
Nate's opinion is of that traffic impact or parking demand analysis is before
Yeah.
they feel it's appropriate.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not an automatic approval.
Correct. Yeah, I was to make sure there's like a check and a balance there in terms of does it pass the giggle test?
Which, again, is kind of some question, right? So if you have a parking requirement that says you have this much building, this is the amount of spaces, you're going in with a by right plan. If you're subject to providing a parking demand analysis, which is, at the discretion of the township's agencies, whether it's acceptable or not, you don't really have a certainty of if you're at a by right situation or not. You could spend money preparing this plan, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we don't really like your parking demand analysis. We think you need this many parking spaces. And then does it end up just being an argument or another battle that you have to fight? Whereas if you have an actual by right plan, there's nothing that could be said to change that status.
Tom, to that
I mean-
point, like, I think your idea about the waiver that's like a potential, like an interesting concept, because it's allowing kind of the flexibility and doing what we want to happen, which especially around housing, which is lower the barriers to building housing. But I see your point in terms of the parking demand analysis potentially being a barrier instead of what it's trying to be.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think someone else was going to talk.
Do we know how much parking contributes to impervious area within the township? It strikes me that parking is a big part of our stormwater management problem. So
I think-
reducing parking as much as we can to ameliorate some of our stormwater management seems like a good thing. But I don't know if that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Conscious.
reducing parking in the future, I mean, with stormwater management requirements these days, I mean, you're reducing the runoff from a property. I think the stormwater management problems that townships are having are from the sins of the past. And
but
which
you're
is why a
having-
lot of our
Gonna
regulations
reduce-
are so high.
If you were going to reduce, you would require more like robust like street facilities. So you would have like a larger cross section of a road, more stormwater, more retention, more curbscape, possibly kind of a wider road so you could actually have parked cars on the roads. Because right now everything is tight. It's at the minimum standards, with not a lot of on-site retention facilities along that. So if you were to say, hey, this house only has to have one spot and then an allowable one on the street, as long as you have curbscape, you have capture, you have a lot of other things, you can definitely reduce it in the aggregate moving forward by having, yes, you'll have wider streets, but then you'll have more stormwater, if that makes sense.
The other thing is, this township has approved some narrow roads. Hartfeld, 18-foot road width. You can't park a
Yeah.
car on the street.
Well,
because if
it's
you-
narrow roads and no curbs. Narrow roads and no curbs.
Yeah, and no curb. You can't park a car where I live and expect a rubbish truck or a delivery truck to come down the road. So by diminishing the number of spaces, you create a real problem. You may think it helped development, but it creates chaos afterwards.
Hmm.
And I can tell you that rubbish truck people constantly have problems coming down my road. In addition, if you want to see what just square footage in no study does, look at what they did at the library in Kennett. That street is always double parked because of the apartments, and everybody parks in the library lot. I go there frequently, wife, and there's never
No
Much
parking
space.
at
Just-
the library.
huh? Yeah, it's a
Just go to Hokessen, Mike, right? There you go.
Yeah, I mean, visit the Naked Olive. You can't even park. You can't even get a parking space there at all.
Yeah. I guess that's another one too, is like, is the township ever going to have like borough problems? And that's kind of what the parking would ultimately kind of like really manifest itself in terms of a tight situation, like tough Kenneman. Like that's kind of where I could see this kind of proofing out in the most like reducing parking counts on site, creating like
Yeah.
we will eventually need a parking enforcement division of the township, part of Southern Chester County Regional Police, just to do that, kind of.
Right, so reducing.
traditional
parking
meter-maid
and
function.
Development only creates chaos later
Yeah.
on, in my opinion. If you're
Yeah,
gonna
like the
reduce
borough, you
parking
can
to
waive your
encourage
parking requirements
developers,
within the borough. You just have to buy spaces
gonna
from the
cause
parking
chaos later
garage.
on.
Mhm.
So I think you need to maximize the amount of parking. And in institutions, you need studies. I don't understand why a library or museum.
Is there an option for like a
Unlikely
parking-
I'll see one in
Yeah.
my lifetime here, but nevertheless, what I saw in Kennett is crazy.
similar to what we're doing for a traffic impact study? Is there a parking impact study where if a development wants to come in, they could pay a fee towards creating parking? That was my concern with the village center concept. It's a very dense concept with no really on-site parking, I think, for most of those uses. If that gets filled out the way I think we intend the zoning regulation to
but
envisions
is the
it,
ta-
it's
does-
it's kind
is
of
the ta-
going to it's going to kind of arrive on needing the township to build a parking garage somewhere
Yeah, right.
back
Yeah,
behind it
exactly.
somewhere. Which if
Yeah, that's
the
how the
case,
borough works.
Yeah, which if that's the case, if somebody wants to come and develop it, do they need to pay the township a fee for the equivalent amount of parking space that's going to need to be built by the township? Otherwise, the township's going to be looking for, how do we pay for this?
Mm.
No.
Yeah.
The rest of the residents in the township aren't going to want to pay for a parking garage just to support commercial entities.
Well, yeah, look at Oxford Borough too. I mean, they just built a parking garage and it was like a huge battle just to get it because nobody wanted it. But the township's never going to make money on a parking garage ever. But is it going to promote economic development? Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what I'm hearing, since I know we're close to time, is maybe look at that maybe waiver option, put in some more or put in requirements, and then provide that option for parking demand analysis. If provided, then a waiver to the minimum requirements. Does that seem like
Is this parking in zoning?
sorry?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I think it would provide a unique situation where the Board of Supervisors can waive the parking requirements based upon the submission of a parking demand analysis. So then all of a sudden you're not required to get a variance for not providing parking so long as you can justify your reduction in parking with a demand analysis.
Makes sense. Yeah,
Yep.
We'll work on that.
Certainly seems to me to be a reasonable approach.
Great. Awesome. Well, with we got through all the articles. You do have another week to submit any comments that you may have on these articles. We ask for comments by next Wednesday, January 29th. So especially after this conversation, if anything pops into your head, feel free to put it in the PDF. We will have our next task force meeting. I'm sorry, not Wednesday. I'll update that. It is February, it's the 19th. Let me double check. Yes, it is the 19th, February 19th at the same time. This will also be kind of in this arrangement, virtual for those who want to attend virtually, and then in person for those who have planning commission afterwards. We'll go over the historic preservation article and signage. And then our public outreach meeting is going to be the week after at the same time. We didn't really get into a lot of details about the public outreach meeting, but essentially the purpose of that meeting, kind of much like the second public outreach meeting where we talked about the character zones, we're going to be presenting the zoning districts. So we're working with our urban designer to prepare some visuals, perspective view, street view of what the districts could potentially look like with the regulations that we have drafted. So there will be some visuals, the intent statements, maps. We'll have the draft zoning map, and we'll want to get feedback from community members. It will be structured like an open house, but we'll provide a brief presentation right at the beginning just to set the scene for anyone is there right at 5:30. And then if people come in later, we can get them up to speed. So you all have the flyer. So we encourage you to share it with your neighbors. We'll send it out again as an attachment in an email along with this meeting summary later this week. Any questions? Or
No,
last
thank you
minute
very
thoughts?
much, Sam.
Great. Thank you all. This
Good
was
seeing
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
really
Yep, good seeing
productive.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yep, take
Bye
care.
all.
Bye.